Welcome to the show that puts you at the centre of the national conversation, talking about the issues that matter to you the most. There's never been a greater need for transparency in politics. Faith in politicians is at its lowest ebb for years. And if they want the trust of the people back, they're going to have to come clean about why they say and do what they say and do. All week, Sky News has been bringing you the Westminster Accounts, a major project from us here at Sky and Tortoise Media, showing the value of gifts given, the full scale of donations to individuals and political parties, and how much MPs really earn. Tonight, we'll do our best to answer your questions and discuss the issues raised by our investigations. I'm Trevor Phillips, and this is The Great Debate. Who is paying our politicians and why? And who's benefiting from the money flowing through our political system? The Westminster Accounts allows for the first time everyone to search via an MP's name or a voter's postcode. We've shown you who's received the most money and earnings in this Parliament and which donors give to individual MPs as well as parties, and which companies and people have donated the most. We know that some MPs find this uncomfortable. They've told us so. But that's what we and our viewers panel are here to do. Tonight, we'll speak to people across the country. They'll have their say and they'll share their views. While joining us here in the studio this week are Heather Brooke, whose groundbreaking work lifted the lid on MPs' expenses back in 2009. James Harding, the editor and founder of Tortoise Media, whose organisation worked closely with Sky on the Westminster Accounts. Bob Kerslake, crossbench peer and former head of the Civil Service. And Henry Hill, deputy editor of Conservative Home. The big question tonight, the Westminster Accounts. Who funds your MP?
Who funds our politics and our politicians?
There's no incentive for MPs really to make it easy to do the sort of comparison that you've done in this exercise.
Shouldn't MPs be banned from having second jobs?
Duck houses and moats. You couldn't make it up.
To clean up the system of MPs' expenses, to prevent abuse and to ensure transparency.
We are going to hold MPs to account.
The more transparency, the better, so that everybody can see exactly what has been declared.
Yes, we're from Sky News.
All-party parliamentary groups. They're a big part of the Westminster system.
I don't think there is sufficient transparency in terms of why they're doing it.
The potential problem is in the lack of transparency on funding.
This is our democracy. MPs are there to make laws which govern our lives. If we don't know where the money's coming from or who's behind that money, that's a serious threat to democracy.
I think transparency is really important, and that's why we have a set of rules and regulations in place to provide that transparency for people, and it's important that those rules are adhered to.
Let's go straight to our viewers panel, and I want to talk to Derek Watson. Derek, I know you've got a view on this and you've got a question for our panel. Go ahead.
Good evening, Trevor. Yes. Whilst politicians' fundings actions are legal, they're shrouded in smoke and mirrors, which often serves to agitate voters and incents public sector workers, as evidenced in the nursing profession, who are fighting for a fair day's salary for a fair day's work. So, Trevor, my question is, are those who pursue a political career motivated by the common good of the people or by lucrative double jobbing?
Thank you very much, Derek. I like the expression double jobbing. Derek's question for our panel is, are our MPs motivated by the common good? And James Harding, you almost couldn't make this up. Live show, half an hour ago, we learned that the former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, I was going to say has trousered, that's impolite, has been donated £1 million by somebody very rich. What do you make of it?
What's going on? Well, Derek said two things there that I think are really interesting. One is smoke and mirrors, and the nature of this whole project is, in theory, about transparency. And I say in theory because the strange thing about the whole undertaking has been realising that all of these things are declared, but we can't really see what's going on. So it's a different version of smoke and mirrors. It's transparency without visibility. They're telling you, but you can't see what's really going on. And so what you just described, Trevor, is a perfect case in point. Derek talked about double jobbing. There are lots of people in Parliament who have second jobs, who have other forms of earnings. Actually, what you learn from the Westminster Accounts, because you can rank everyone in terms of how they earn money, is there's actually a very, very small number of people who really earn a lot of money from outside jobs. There are only about, 20, 30 people out of a, Parliament of 650. But then you find what you just described, which is a donation, so not an earnings, a donation. Someone's given the former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, £1 million. And this is what I mean about the difference between transparency and visibility. We've just seen the latest update of the Register of Interests, that Christopher Harborne, who's, and I don't know, I'm just literally trying to figure out who this person is, a business person apparently based in Thailand, investor in cryptocurrencies, but the truth is we really don't know, has donated £1 million to the quote-unquote office of Boris Johnson. What does that office do? Who does it pay? What is it for? Is it personal? Is it political? We just don't know.
Henry, we need to stress, of course, that all of this is perfectly lawful. And, in fact, the point that James has made is that the Westminster Accounts has really just collected publicly available information. So there's nothing unlawful, nothing illegal here, but it's murky, isn't it?
Well, I mean, yeah, to an extent, and certainly when you set it to sinister violin music, it's going to seem even more so. I think the important thing about this is that there is some wrongdoing. There always is. People in Parliament have the same spectrum of motivations as the rest of humankind, and there will be bad actors. Owen Paterson, I think, was an obvious example of someone who last year was done, or the year before, was done for something that was quite clearly a breach of the rules. But again, some of it is entirely legitimate. I think that having people working second jobs actually sometimes enhances Parliament in at least two ways. One, quite specifically, I think if you look at the numbers, some of the biggest earners are lawyers. Now, if you're a lawyer, you're taking a very big pay cut just to become an MP.
So one of the top names here is Geoffrey Cox. He's made a lot of money as a barrister.
Absolutely, former Attorney General. And Parliament ultimately needs lawyers to serve as law officers, some of the most important people in Cabinet. So, allowing them to continue to earn a legal salary is very useful. But also, it gives MPs a degree of independence from the government, especially if they're Tory MPs currently in the government's in office. Because if you took away second jobs, the only way for an MP to really increase their income, which most people want to do, would be to climb the greasy pole. So yes, they need to be properly scrutinised. Transparency is good, but I think it's important to remember that merely the fact of people having second jobs is not evidence of wrongdoing.
I don't think, and I'm going to stress this all night. I don't think anybody here at Sky or from Tortoise Media is saying that there is wrongdoing here. I think the question here is, do we understand quite what it is that's going on? One question that Henry's raised, Heather, is this issue, and Derek talked about double jobbing. Lots of people do more than one job, portfolio existence. Is it right for an MP? Do you think it works for MPs?
I think it does, really. I mean, yes, I think for the reasons that Henry said, that you want experienced people to be in Parliament, and you want them to be from as broad a range of skills as possible. And again, you don't want them to be totally dependent on Parliament for their careers, for their livelihoods. They need some independence themselves.
So when people complain about career politicians, you think it's a good idea that they have something else?
Yeah, but then I think the issue is around how much do we know about, how clear is it what their jobs are? And it's not so much the jobs. To me, it's not the jobs that are the problem. It's the conflicts of interest that are the problem. And that's where Owen Paterson, got into trouble, because he didn't declare his conflict of interest with Randox Health. So it's when there's these other, and it could be a job, it could be being lobbied, it could be any number of things that come to bear on a politician. And as long as we know what those things are, then we can figure out, well, whose interest are they working in? Is it the public's, or is it, you know, this company that's employing them, or is it this lobbyist that's taking them out to dinner or to the rugby or whatever?
Bob Kerslake, when you were in charge of the civil service, did you feel confident that not just ministers, but the MPs who came to talk to you about different issues or talk to colleagues about different political issues, did you feel confident that you knew their motivations and there wasn't this kind of, the kind of things that people worry about going on?
Well, by and large, I'd say yes. And just to deal directly with Derek's question, in my experience, the bulk of politicians of all parties come into politics for the public good. I genuinely believe that. But unfortunately, we've had some very high-profile cases where they transparently haven't come into politics for the common good. I'm a passionate believer in transparency because I think transparency ultimately brings with it greater trust. And the great service to the work that you've done through Sky and Tortoise is to make it much more accessible to the ordinary public. And that's a good thing.
It's interesting. I think that we can see from our panel that there's quite a surprising level of support for the view that actually most politicians do come into it for good reasons. But let's talk about another aspect of why I think people are concerned about this. Louise Brown, who I think has some thoughts about the way it looks and feels from where she's sitting. Louise.
Okay. Is it fair that MPs' salaries are so high while that of nurses and other health workers are so low?
Why is that such an issue for you? Because it's a job. We've decided that they're going to be paid $84,000 thereabout. Not everybody has to earn the same amount of money, do they?
Nurses and health workers, you know, they're saving people's lives, and you know, are MPs doing that?
Yeah, but in this investigation, Louise, is it just the money that concerns you, or is it the issue that we've been talking about here about the sources of money and so on?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think it's both. I mean, how is the job of an MP worth so much more of that, of people working themselves to the bone in a hospital? And of course, it worries me where the sources of the money comes from as well. Yes, it's both things.
Okay. Henry, of course, there's a context for this, isn't there? That actually, at a time when a lot of people feel that they're under financial pressure, the country is struggling in various ways. Whether or not it is legitimate, and I'm stressing it again, there's nothing unlawful here, the sense that money is coming from sources for reasons we don't quite know is not good for politics, is it?
No, I think the public, there is especially in the wake of the expenses scandal, there is an absolutely corrosive mistrust of politicians, and that's ultimately bad for all of us, because most politicians are in politics for good reasons. They're trying to do their best, and if they don't have public confidence, then that's a problem. I think, speaking specifically to the question, one problem that we have consistently had, and this actually I think predates the expenses scandal, is the fact that lots of people don't like it when politicians are paid more money. The original reason that the expenses system became the scandal that it was is because basically Parliament was using it as a way of padding MPs' remuneration because they didn't want to raise the headline figure. We've now got to a point where MPs' pay is actually set by an independent body, but every time that independent body suggests an increase, the MPs all kick off about it. So to speak specifically to the question, ultimately there are only 650 MPs. They have quite a specific job. I actually think, probably not a popular opinion, they're probably not paid enough for the sacrifices that you have to make. And if we paid them more through the official channels, there'd be less scope for the kind of stuff that you've been investigating.
Well, I want to come back to this issue of the level of salary, but just very briefly. Lastly, I just want to quickly come back to... I think we've got Connor Summerall on the line. And Connor, I know, because we've spoken to you before, Connor's looked at the site, and he has a point specifically about what Derek Watson called double jobbing. Connor, good evening.
Good evening. My local MP is also the leader of the local council, and I'm kind of in two minds about it, because on the one hand, I think it can lead to some joint-up thinking between national government and local government, but they are two full-time jobs, and I just wonder, can one person really do them both well?
Oh, that's interesting. Bob Kerslake, you ran a big city council for quite a long time, which indeed produced a cabinet minister, David Blunkett. And, of course, these are now quite big jobs. What do you think?
I think it's a legitimate question to ask. And I think the test of any second job or even third job in some of the cases we've seen is, to what extent are they still realistically able to do the job that you would expect of your MP? It's not the fact that they do a second job, it's can the two realistically go together? And you're quite right, the job of being a leader of a council is a very demanding job. I can't say it's impossible, but you're right to say, can the two jobs be done together? And that's the sort of thing that the electorate in that MP's area ought to be asking them.
James, have we learnt anything this week that would throw light on Connor's question? Are all these jobs doable?
I think Connor's question is brilliant because, in some ways, you might say, look at the experience we've had over the last few years. The relationship between Westminster government and local government has felt much too separate. You might say, actually, Connor, there's a real advantage for having someone who can see what's happening nationally and see what's happening close to home. But I do think you put your finger on the central question around second jobs, which is around divided loyalties, or as Heather put it, conflicts of interest. There's, can you do the job that you're being asked to do? But is there any risk that you're being torn in two directions at once? And I think that there's a separate issue, which is about the amount of money MPs earn. You know, I think Henry's got a point. You'd love to have a system where you really feel as though MPs, people who are making the law and influencing the way in which government is run, are really focused primarily, if not solely, on what's happening in Westminster Parliament and their constituencies. How much are they being distracted? How much are they seeking work elsewhere? I think that's a real tension.
Heather, what do you make of it? People are rather sort of ambivalent about this. They want MPs to be grounded, but they're worried about the money distorting their choices.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to go back to the question about deservingness of pay, because I think that's such a bigger issue than just, you know, MPs' expenses or how much their salary is. It's a real societal issue, and the reasons nurses get paid so badly is largely because they're women, because we don't value caring professions in a monetary way. We just think it's unpaid labor that people do out of their, you know, the goodness of their heart. So how dare they even ask for a raise? And, you know, to me, that's a real root of our economy. You know, we need to value carers, and if we, you know, our society is, we show value by how much money people get, and if we're not paying nurses or carers, then.
Very quickly, Bob, last point.
Yes, I'd say I agree with Heather. I think the problem is not that MP's salary is too high, it's that nurses' salary is too low. That's the problem.
All right. You are watching a special great debate on the Westminster Accounts. Coming up, the multi-millionaire Dale Vince tells us why he gives thousands of pounds to the Labour Party and its leader.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I'm based in Belfast, a city transformed by peace, but still struggling with its past. Politically, the two sides are as far apart as ever, and it's over that question of who has sovereignty in Northern Ireland, the very issue that's been the source of tension here for generations. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 25 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
We help you understand the world with us.
Today, we have reached an agreement with the Conservative Party on support for government in Parliament.
We already know what the government gets out of this deal. What exactly does the DUP get out of it? Well, £1.5 billion. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. You can't live in a place like this and not appreciate the environment.
Welcome back to The Great Debate, where we're discussing the Westminster Accounts and asking, who funds your MP? Well, when it comes to donations to political parties, people obviously want to know why donors give and what they expect in return. The founder of the green energy company Ecotricity and environmental campaigner Dale Vince has given more than £350,000 to the Labour Party, as well as individual donations to Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner. He's also given a lot of money to Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion. I spoke to him this afternoon and began by asking him why he gives to a political party at all.
I tend to try to support the causes that I believe in, that I think are trying to do good in the world. Labour Party falls into that category. I think it's vital that they have some degree of increased funding to fight the next general election, because the disparity between them and the Tories is always so large. But I have given money to Greenpeace, to the Green Party, to the Lib Dems as well, to Sea Shepherd, to Extinction Rebellion, to Just Stop Oil, to a women's refuge in Stroud as well, to the Good Law Project. So the money that I give, that I'm able to give, I'm very happy to do to help a whole bunch of different good causes.
Well, political parties are special, though, aren't they? What do you expect to get for your money from the Labour Party or indeed the Green Party or the Lib Dems?
Well, nothing, just to help them, really, to have let's say, personal satisfaction, perhaps, of feeling that I've done something to help out, because, the Green Party are pursuing a good agenda. The Lib Dems are also on the progressive side of political life, along with the Labour Party. And these guys need help. There's a huge disparity in funding, and I'm happy to be able to help. It's as simple as that.
You give money, as you say, to Just Stop Oil. Keir Starmer's been pretty clear that he is not on the side of the tactics of Just Stop Oil and others. Does that not make you a little bit uncomfortable?
No, it doesn't at all. Keir Starmer has criticised the extreme tactics of Just Stop Oil, not all the tactics, but, you know, the extreme end of disruption. I understand that. He's not alone in doing that. Lots of other people have as well, and I've got no issue with that. I also believe that the Labour Party will not issue new licences for drilling in the North Sea. So I think they're actually aligned policy-wise with Just Stop Oil, and the differences of opinion is over tactics. But look, in life, we don't get a completely best fit anywhere. When we vote for a party in the election, we don't necessarily agree with everything they've done or will do. We take a best fit approach. That's normal. And I think it's the same with funding. I don't agree with everything that Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil do, and I quite frequently say so publicly, but amicably, and it doesn't change my support for their overall mission.
Let's talk about the issue of donations in themselves. And as you will know from the work that Sam Coates and the Sky team and the Tortoise team have done, what we try to do is to create more transparency around the money that goes into politics. Are you satisfied that we are, as a country, in the right place on this? Or do you think we need to have new rules or a new regime or a new way of approaching things so more people know more about where the money comes from and where it goes to?
Well, there's a lot to say here, right? First off, I did chat to Sam. I understand that it took several months of work to unpick the many different sources of information, a lot of which is quite opaque, to stitch it together into the widget that does present a searchable database. I think it's a fantastic piece of work. I think there's not enough light shone on donations. I think Sam and his team unveiled some let's call them shadowy organisations that have donated quite a lot of money to the Tory party, for example. And I think it's wrong in our democracy that a news organisation should have to do that, right? This is the digital age. All of that stuff should be online and easily accessible. Then on the question of funding, I think there's a clear case for public funding of general elections. If you look at this total sum of money spent at an election, it's less than £100 million. It's a drop in the ocean in order to choose the right government for our country. When you look at the sums of money involved, if we get the wrong government, the wrong leader, Liz Truss for 1 month lost the country more than £30 billion, right? So 100 million of public funding to keep politics clean in general elections, I think would be a good thing to do.
Dale Vince there. We should say that we tried to speak to several Conservative donors, but none of them wanted to speak to us. Well, let's talk to our viewers panel. They do want to talk to us, and I'll talk to Robin Gillingham. Robin, you're in Devon. Where are you standing on all of this?
Hi, Trevor. I just think there should be a funding cap on these donations to try and create a sort of level playing field for all the parties and not just give any financial benefit to wealthy buyers. I think this small change would give voters a fairer, sort of more democratic outcome. So my question would be, should there be a funding cap on donations to create a level playing field for all parties?
Thank you very much, Robin. Robin's question for the panel is, should there be a funding cap on donations to create a level playing field for all parties? Bob Kerslake, what do you think? Should there be such a restriction? And if so, where would you put it?
It's a good question. I personally think that our politics couldn't function without donations, and they're not per se a bad thing, as long as they're transparent, as long as there are clear rules. But I do worry about the imbalance of funding between the political parties, which has increased in my experience over time. And I think there is a question about whether there should be some level of cap on that amount of money going to any particular party. Unless you want to move towards public funding, you do end up, I think, with a very significant inequality. Where that should be, I couldn't give you an answer tonight, Trevor, but I do record a concern, if you like, about just how unequal the battle is between the political parties.
Henry, what do you think about this idea? And what do you think about Dale's suggestion that we might put essentially an embargo on donations around general elections, but fund parties equally for their general election campaigns?
So I guess there are two separate issues. On the idea of limiting donations, I think the question is, one, if you're going to have a level playing field, how do you define level? You know, if you've got a party such as UKIP a few years ago with 1 MP and you've got the Conservatives with 300 and something MPs, should they have the same funding limit, or should they have a funding limit that's proportional to their vote share? And who do you police that? And the people that you end up putting in charge of policing that will actually have a very large role in our democracy, which is something I think we need to take into account. The idea of public funding, ultimately, this money is going to end up in politics one way or another. There is no perfectible system. You can't build firewalls strong enough. So if you shift towards public funding and capping donations, what will happen is, as we see in the United States, you end up in the US, they're called political action committees. You will end up with lots of allied groups, all of them receiving money. It will be much harder to track. I know during the Brexit referendum, it was very difficult to try and track, you know, which allied group was getting donations from where. So currently, the system is that the parties get the money, they declare those donations, and those donations can be compiled into a relatively transparent database. If we move away from it, that won't be the case.
Heather, you have experience of the United States, and Henry's mentioned the role of political action committees, which are a huge business in the United States. Do you think that vitiates, that makes the point of trying to limit the size and extent of donations or increase public funding pointless because people get round the system by setting up these other bodies?
I don't, actually. I mean, there's a lot of issues with American politics, and it's not just the political action committees. I do think there's a question of fundamental fairness around should one person with £1 million, you know, be able to bring all of that influence, and then you have to have, you know, 10 people of 100,000, or, you know, it skews whose interests are getting represented. And do you want the top slice of society having this unequal representation in Parliament, effectively? Because that's what happens when you have no cap on limits, is that you end up with a very tiny elite having huge outsized influence on our government.
But is that entirely right? Because actually, I think we can have a look at the top 20 donors. And actually, when you look at them, they're not, by and large, individuals. They are big outfits. The biggest donors, actually, are to Labour unions and Unite, GMB. The Co-op gives them a lot of money. And there are companies, the people who build farm machinery, JCBs and all of that, give Conservatives a lot of money. Most of these are not, the biggest donors are not necessarily individuals. I mean, Dale Vince, who gives 300 to 400,000, didn't even make the top 20.
Yeah, but I think the thing is, if you look at America, you can see that a lot of the big funding is coming from a very tiny amount of individuals, and it really does skew politics and political representation. And I don't think we want to import that kind of stratification into Britain. I mean, at least when you have these big groups that, like, you know, a union or a big collective, that's a lot of people together giving a huge amount of money. It's not just one person.
OK. James, has an investigation led you to think maybe we should find some way of regulating, controlling, corralling the donations?
So, well, this conversation is because I buy Henry's point, which is if you create essentially a state arbiter of who gets what money, there's a whole set of problems associated with that. And if you don't allow for the freedom of expression of political donations, that's a problem too. I think one of the issues about the leaderboard that you showed there, that was donations to MPs. There's also donations to parties. Yeah. And so I think the point that Robin was making, which was about a cap, is a really interesting point. Because if you get back to first principles, what you're saying is, look, if you really believe in a cause, if you are like Dale Vince, you want to change the government of the country, how are you able to do that and express that and use your resources to do so? OK, fine. The question is, should there be a limit to that so you don't have, as Heather says, a few individuals who have outsized influence? And we should say those individuals then often end up in the House of Lords. Okay. We've got an issue there.
All right. Let's take this a little further and talk a little bit about how we understand these donations. Gareth Kearns, I think you wanted to make a point about transparency.
Yeah. Well, how can the parliamentary process be considered to be at all transparent when there's
one donor who's given the address of a derelict building. There's another one that is a firm of accountants who are, we must assume, the proxies of the true donor and are thereby maintaining the donor's anonymity. So my question would be, what are the implications of donor anonymity for our country and our democracy?
This is quite a big issue, isn't it, Henry? I mean, my poor colleague, Sam Coates, has been scouring the country, knocking on doors for donors whose names are in the record, but finding empty offices with wet carpets and all the rest of it. It's not good.
No, and I think this is a regulatory problem. Now, it might be wrong because you've been investigating this and I haven't. But as I understood it, actually, donor anonymity is not allowed in the United Kingdom. There was actually a bit of a furore during the Brexit referendum because it was, for reasons terror-related, allowed in Northern Ireland for a while, and there was a big donation via the DUP to the pro-Brexit campaign. But that was specifically, allegedly, because there was a gap in Northern Ireland. I don't think you shouldn't be able to have donor anonymity of that sort, and if it's currently occurring, that is a failure of the regulator that needs to be policed.
I think the bank account cannot be anonymous, but we don't necessarily need to know who... we're not necessarily allowed to know who holds a bank account.
Well, just to sort of identify what the real problems are that we've had, and it is a point worth making that for all the MPs' declarations that, you know, our system is very transparent, it's taken a team of people from 2 newsrooms 9 months to try and make sense of this. I think, you know, Bob Kerslake's point is absolutely right. The vast majority of people, there is this public service, and the truth is that actually on the vast majority of donors, you don't knock on a door and not know who's there. Actually, you can see it pretty clearly. The problem that you've got is that a number of donors do disguise themselves. That's a problem. The second problem is the MPs report how money is given in a bunch of different places using a bunch of different databases and PDFs and whatnot. So it's really hard to actually make sense of it all together. I think the benefit of the Westminster Accounts is it does all come together in one place, and then you can begin to identify the ones that simply don't make sense, and then you go out and investigate them.
And indeed, I can say with authority, because I had to look at it to present this show, it does help a lot. We'll go to a break. You're watching a special great debate on the Westminster Accounts. When we come back, we'll discuss more about why it's so often so hard to see who's behind political donations.
Is anyone in there? Does anyone work in there? There's nothing identifying any company whatsoever. The floor looks pretty damp. There's really no sign of life. It doesn't look like there has been for some time.
Welcome back to the great debate where we're discussing the Westminster Accounts and asking who funds your MPs. Now, how does the relationship between business and politics really work? Of course, money isn't the only way of gaining influence. The art of lobbying existed since Julius Caesar got stabbed in the Senate. There doesn't have to be anything illegal about paying people to persuade others to do something, but right now we can't track for certain where that money is always coming from. Let's talk to Judith Randall, who I think is with us. Judith, you have some concerns on the issues of influence in general. What's your thought?
Yes, I question the whole system when it comes to funding of our politicians and payment for work outside of Parliament. MPs' credibility is on the line when they make so much money outside of Parliament. I have lost faith in our political system and worry politicians can be bought and then act in the interests of private companies and the wealthy elite. And I have a question, and that is, are our MPs too influenced by outside interests?
Thank you very much, Judith. Judith's question is, are MPs too close to outside interests? Henry, we've been talking about money, but there are all sorts of other ways in which what used to be called suasion can be brought. You know, friendships, not wanting to be embarrassed in front of your friends and so on. Do you think we've got an issue with that?
Yes, I think, again, it's something that can often be overplayed. I think the idea that, you know, most MPs are not in hock to corporate or other interests, but you can do non-monetary ways to influence MPs. The most obvious one is perks. You know, a nice day at the races, a very nice meal, the kind of stuff that, because you're paying for it, they sometimes, if you can do it through the right way, they don't have to declare it on something that someone like James can look up. APPGs, which I think we've mentioned, are the most obvious example of this.
All-party parliamentary groups.
All-party parliamentary groups. Basically, most of them are completely harmless. They bring together politicians from different parties on an area of interest. But the way that they're accounted is very much a relic of the pre-expenses scandal era. And so you can do an awful lot of stuff with APPGs, like buying yourself nice things, and there's no receipts at the end for anyone to check. So that's really the avenue that I'd be concerned about.
Heather, you became famous for triggering the expenses scandal, but actually, aside from the bunts, do you think that there are other ways that we need to think about or understand by which MPs may be influenced to do things other than their constituents' interests? Yeah, I mean, certainly there's... the main thing you want to know is influence, is what are all the influences that are bearing down on a politician, and not just a politician, but also, I would say, quite high-level civil servants. And we need to know what those influences are, and our lobbying law is pretty opaque. There's not a lot of reporting requirements, and there's a lot of ways that you know, influence can be done, and it's usually in these more informal mechanisms, dinners, as perks, and really it's access. That's the main thing. It's just getting access to these people, and that's what you see so much of this. Even the donations, a lot of it is paying to access the people that make the big decisions. Bob, you spend a lot of time in Whitehall, and indeed, actually, there's something familiar from local government in this, that actually it's not just somebody standing people money, but people belonging to the right circles, going to the right golf club, being to get football matches or shooting weekends or whatever it is. Does that... We don't have any controls over that. In the United States, what they call K Street, which is the big lobbying street in Washington, there are very, very stringent rules about who can do what with whom. Should we have more control on that?
Look, I think there is a case to say it's not tight enough. I think in local government, actually, it is pretty tight, but even there, you can see councillors sometimes getting unduly influenced by those outside. And let's face it, the money involved is small compared to the prizes sometimes they're seeking to achieve, changes in legislation, changes in decisions. So, yes, there's a constant risk, and we have to be constantly vigilant about it. Like Henry, I think most APPGs are pretty harmless and do a fairly effective job. But there's always that risk there, and we constantly have to review and revise and adapt our arrangements and controls to make sure that we're capturing the latest way in which influence is being improperly done.
Just very briefly, James, you probably entirely apart from this investigation, you probably sat in the two most establishment journalistic jobs in the entire world, editor of the Times, head of news at BBC. Did it ever worry you that there's a sort of sense that there's an elite crowd that influence each other in ways that we don't understand?
Yes, well, I just want to say one thing to Judith, which is please don't despair about politics and politicians. Please don't, because it would actually be a misreading the Westminster Accounts. The thing that should, when you go in and you look at it, what you actually see is it's not the case that everyone is, you know, looking out to make money this way and that. There, as I said right at the beginning, it's actually quite a small number of people. It's definitely the case, Trevor, that there is inevitably a problem, and it doesn't just happen in our capital, in London, it happens in capitals everywhere, that everyone gets a bit close and a bit cosy. Actually, one of the benefits of our system is that you go back, you go home, you go to your constituency and you try and hear what's really going on. I would say that the real issue is the way in which the rules of that system work, the way in which the rules of our democracy work, more so necessarily than money.
OK. Just to reinforce what James said, I think the average amount of money that an MP gets in donations, all the rest of it, is less than 15,000. It's quite small, actually.
And it is, yeah.
All right, you're watching a special great debate on the Westminster Accounts. When we come back, how much does the lack of transparency around money in politics matter to the reputation of Westminster?
To get change, you need two things. You need momentum. You also need something of a consensus in the building behind me.
Quietly, more and more people around here are coming out and telling me that there is a case for changing the rules.
We developed a system that can detect elephants, but also humans in real life. We use basically a standard Bushnell camera. It's a wildlife camera that's being used across the world by wildlife organizations. And what we did is we added some of our own hardware to it, and that makes it now possible to analyze photos that are taken by these wildlife cameras using artificial intelligence, using machine learning.
We were in contact with different organizations that are active in wildlife conservation, like WWF, but also with someone from the University of Stirling. And they told us that they use these wildlife cameras, and then they have to go back to these cameras after like 6 months to collect the memory cards. And then they can see what there's on the photo. There was like a poacher there 10 weeks ago, or an elephant 12 weeks ago. And that's when we thought, well, what about if you can see that information in real time? And that's how we came up with this system. And we tested this in Gabon. And now if you deploy this camera in the rainforest, within minutes, you know whether there are humans or elephants in the forest.
Cool, but inside there, it's a satellite modem. So basically, you can deploy these systems now anywhere in the world, and we can alert rangers when something of interest is happening in the field. So if an elephant walks by, a ranger now basically it gets a WhatsApp notification or an SMS message and saying there's an elephant detected near this position.
We trained a machine learning model together with the University of Stirling that is over 90% accurate in detecting humans and elephants on the photo. But obviously, we can use any machine learning model on our camera trap, so we can also use this system to detect rhinos or leopards or other types of animals.
Welcome back to The Great Debate, where we're discussing the Westminster Accounts and asking who funds your MP. Now, from what we've been reporting, you could say it's obvious we need more transparency. Relying on a register of members' interests doesn't do that much to reassure us about the moral compass of our politicians. Second jobs, donations, just part of the murky world of political influence. But there's no real momentum to reform the system, as far as we can tell. Any attempts have been piecemeal at best. So what can we do to ensure that the people elected by us are acting for all of us? Let's talk to Carlos Enrique. Carlos, what's your answer?
Oh, it was more a question than an answer that I was going to make, but definitely it doesn't look like from the panelists that there is really a very significant amount of consciousness about the problem. They are all very comfortable with the current situation, and there is a very clear situation where these funds could potentially be used for
you've got a question for us, Carlos.
Yeah, the question is, how can we increase the integrity of the political system?
OK, thank you very much. Carlos has got a question, which I'm going to ask you to answer very briefly. How do we protect integrity in politics? Heather, you started all this.
I did, I guess. Well, the reason I even started it was because I didn't think there was the integrity that Parliament had was based on a falsity. It was an illusion, and once we peeled back and got some facts, we saw that it wasn't as beatific as we thought. So I think that we need to have. I think lobbying is the big thing that has really damaged the integrity of Parliament, and we need a tougher lobbying register.
So controlled lobbying, Henry.
I think you need a clear and realistic idea of what constitutes actually problematic behaviour, and then to have that overseen by a regulator. You can't police everything. You can't control who drinks in what room with whom. It's an impossible mission, and I think that it will eventually just end up corroding politics even more. So a clear idea of what's wrong and empowered to fix it.
Bob?
I think you've got to recognise that trust is vital to good government. The vast bulk of MPs do a good job and they're committed, but they're undermined by a small number who abuse the system. And you've got to constantly work at tackling those people, identifying them and dealing with them. Because I feel angry about those MPs who do a great job and they're undermined by this sort of issue.
A lot of agreement from our audience on that. James, you've made the trouble this week. What would you actually do about it?
So the big lesson that I've learned in this project, and as I said, it's been 9 months, has been there's a difference between transparency and visibility. It's one thing to say, well, I'm declaring everything, and it's another thing to say, it's really clear what I'm doing. And I think that in two regards, we need greater visibility. We need to make sure that the system of reporting in Westminster, not just done by Sky News and us at Tortoise, but by Parliament itself, is easily accessible to every voter in the country. And I think that's an issue inside Parliament, and I also think it's an issue for parties. So I think visibility for MPs and political parties too.
Thank you all. We are going to return to this, but that's all we have time for this evening. It just remains for me to say thank you to our panellists here in the studio. James Harding, Henry Hill, Bob Kerslake and Heather Brooke. But of course, it's you at home who are at the centre of our conversation. And if you'd like to get in touch with the programme, you can always email us at thegreatdebate@sky.uk. And I want to say thank you to our viewers panel, as always, who've been fantastic. And to you at home, keep talking. We'll see you again for The Great Debate.